Welcome everybody. Some lovely music playing in the background to welcome everyone in. If you could just update your name tile so that we know which organisation you are from, and introduce yourself in the chat box. And we'll get started at just about 1:05.
बीते दिनों की किताब जिंदगी लेके आई है, बीते दिनों की किताब घेरे हैं अब हमें यादें बेहिसाब।
बिन पूछे मिले मुझे कितने सारे जवाब, चाहा था क्या पाया है क्या हमने देखिए,
दिल में मगर जलते रहे चाहत के दिए।
Hello to everyone that is joining us and just coming in. I'd like to put you into the chat box to introduce yourself and to update your tiles. And we'll get started about 1:05.
जानम देख लो मिट गई दूरियां, मैं यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ।
Can I also ask if anybody is unhappy about having their photographs taken or their screen shared, if you could message one of the co-hosts privately so we can ensure that you are removed from any publications we use.
जानम देख लो मिट गई दूरियां, मैं यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ। जानम देख लो मिट गई दूरियां, मैं यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ। कैसी सरहदें कैसी मजबूरियां, मैं यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ।
Welcome back everybody. It's nice to see some familiar names from yesterday. Same protocols, if we can introduce ourselves in the chat box and update our name tile so that we can see where everybody is coming from today.
तुम भुला ना सकोगे वो अंदाज हूँ, गूंजता हूँ जो दिल में तो हैरान हो क्यों, मैं तुम्हारे ही दिल की तो आवाज हूँ। सुन सको तो सुनो धड़कनों की ज़बान, मैं यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ। कैसी सरहदें कैसी मजबूरियां, मैं यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ हूँ, यहाँ।
If you hate wearing glasses,
तेरे कुर्बान जामा, तेरी मर्जी जान जामा, तो हर बात मान जामा, तेरी सोनिए ओए ओए ओए। तेरे कुर्बान जामा, तेरी मर्जी जान जामा, तो हर बात मान जामा, तेरी सोनिए ओए ओए ओए। तेरे कुर्बान जामा।
तेनू मैं जान लिया, खूब पहचान लिया, मिलना जो मुझको।
Welcome everyone, we will get started in about 3 minutes. Lovely to see some of your faces again.
खूब पहचान लिया, मिलना जो मुझको है आएगा तुझको सुन ले कुछ गल्ला मेरिया तेनू मैं जान दिया खूब पहचान दिया
लो आ गई लोड़ी वे बना लो जोड़ी वे कलाई कोई यूं थामो न जावे छोड़ी वे न जावे छोड़ी वे
झूठ ना बोली रे ऊपर ना तोली रे जो तूने खाई थी कसमें एक एक तोड़ी रे एक एक तोड़ी रे शाम होते ही नाल यारा दे रोज दा पीना डूबे सूरज तो बंदा भी डूबे है ये कोई जीना
बात चंगी है ये तेरी ध्यान रखांगा आज पी लूं बूंद कल से मैं न चखांगा
हाँ, जो अब शाम होगी तो सीधे घर जाएंगे हाँ हाँ हाँ
तेरे कुर्बान जावा तेरे कुर्बान जावा
Good afternoon, everyone. For those who have only just joined, if I can direct you to the box to introduce yourself. You'll also see that I'm just posting some group rules for today, just in terms of being respectful to one another. Oh, brilliant, Rachel. Great university. I've been enjoying it there. And also, Rachel, it'll be interesting to know I'm actually streaming live from RAF Bryce Norton today, so you can see you from the Army Welfare Service.
Are you ready to start us off, Jaff?
Yes, Jaff, if we can start the music. Right, thank you everyone for joining us today for day 2 of where youth work is now placed, the present. I'm going to hand you over to Jaff to introduce us for the day.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 2. As Lorna said, it is lovely to see so many of you coming back from day 1 and lovely to see so many new faces. So as Lorna said, my name is Jaffa. I am proud, privileged and honoured to be the chair of the Institute for Youth Work, part of a recent cohort of elected members who were elected back in November of last year to represent the voices of youth workers up and down the country. And I'm joined here this afternoon by a number of council colleagues, Esther, Mike, Charlie, Robin, and there's probably Tim has just introduced himself. Good afternoon, Tim. And firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to the organising committee of the conference, our wonderful students, who from based on Ruth's feedback from yesterday's conversation, it was quite a lively discussion, and I'm pretty sure those lively discussions and debates and deliberations are going to continue this afternoon. One of the things I realised I didn't do yesterday was to give you a bit of a potted history in terms of IYW, and some of you will be very close friends of ours. Others may have just come across IYW through the students or through other council members. And so I think it's only right that we do some of that stuff and then bring it into the present moment, and in particular into the discussion that we're going to be having this afternoon. So the IYW was set up back in 2014-15, and it was born out of really the NYA's ambition at the time to have an independent voice for youth workers, and to have an independent body that will enable youth workers up and down the country to have a voice, in particular when it came to key decisions that were being made in and around the sector. And we're incredibly proud to continue that legacy. We are the only national body that represents the voices of youth workers. and you'll all be aware, working in this wonderful, rich sector, that there are many bodies out there, national bodies, that represent different facets of the sector. We are that only body that represents the voices of youth workers. And so it's great to have so many of you, 40 of you, or 39, including myself, of you with us today. And of course, the numbers that came yesterday and the numbers that will come tomorrow. And over the last 5 or 6 years, the IYW has in particular focused on developing the register. And after some discussion with the National Youth Agency late last year, we decided to pass that back over to the NYA as the lead secretariat and as the lead sector body in terms of that. And we've now pivoted ourselves to focus on you, fine folk, on our members and those people who will become our members, to ensure that we provide you a space regularly to convene around thematic issues. And over the last 3 or 4 months, we've explored issues around CSE, International Women's Day, bringing youth workers together from both LGBTQ plus communities and Muslim communities to discuss what does youth work mean in a thematic way, but also what does it mean for youth workers across the entire country and of course internationally. So we're in the process of setting up geographical discussions in collaboration with our partners at the regional youth work units. And so that's what you guys have got to look forward to in the present moment and moving into the future. Again, a huge thank you to everyone who is participating, from national organizations in defense of youth work, the Centre for Youth Impact, NYA, PALAQ, and various others who have all joined together to collaborate over these next 3 days. And what a time, folks, to be a youth worker, right? What a time to be a youth worker. If there was ever a time where young people needed us, well, the last 14 months have demonstrated that time. Not only has COVID impacted on the mental and physical well-being of young people and our colleagues, so many of our colleagues have been impacted as a result of the pandemic. But then when you take into account also the fact that we have had the huge, rightly so, spotlight being put on the Black Lives Matter agenda, and understanding where we come, where we as youth workers ensure that our anti-oppressive practice is being embedded fully and as properly as possible with the work that we do with children and young people, then it makes for such an exciting time within the sector. And of course, there's a lot happening with our national bodies as well. So our friends at the NYA have worked closely with ourselves and other sector partners to ensure that youth workers are given the right status so that we can be seen as key workers, valuable work done by everyone. And in particular, a huge thanks to the NYA for leading on that piece of work. And we'll also see, and we have seen in the last few days, that the changes happening to NCS. And for those of you that have your views about NCS, and I'm sure that they are on a spectrum, it will be interesting to see where that leads us to over the coming days, weeks, months, and in particular years. And then I don't know whether any of you saw it yesterday on Twitter, but unfortunately, girl guiding has come under the lens, has come under the microscope, rightly so again, for not being as inclusive as they perhaps could be, and in particular, not being as inclusive as they could be towards racial communities. So now more than ever before, the work that we do and the discussions and the deliberations and the debates that we have is ever so important. And again, I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to you all for taking time out of what I can imagine are really busy schedules to join us. And I look forward to hearing how this afternoon goes. And hopefully I look forward to seeing you tomorrow as well. So thank you so much. Lorna, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Dafa. Guys, obviously from yesterday's conversation about the qualifications and the position of where we are currently, I think today is going to be a great discussion point. We are going to start with a poll to see where everybody is at. And then open up the breakout rooms following that to discuss further. Please be respectful of each other's opinions, they are varied, but also we actually want to hear that true, genuine feeling. So don't be shy in being vocal, but just be mindful of each other. And then following that, we are going to be having a discussion from Paul at PALAQ and Abby from the NYA. So let's get this party started. So let's see if I can get this poll actioned. I'm going to launch this technology for us all. There we go, guys. So if you can you all see that? So I'm going to give you everybody about 5 minutes on this to allow those people that are joining us as well to participate. There's certainly some diversity. We're going to have an interesting discussion today. Anybody that's struggling with access to the poll, just pop that in the chat. I know our co-host can't, unfortunately. Thank you for that, Diane. I'll be mindful of that. So guys, I know not everybody can participate just from their locations and they're listening. Once I've got about 80% of the polls through, I will close the poll and we can just see a view of what that is. And then we'll have a good starting point for our conversations. Okay, I'll just give this 1 more minute and then I'll end the poll. Right, guys, I'm assuming that that is going to be everybody that is responding at the moment. So I'm going to close the poll now. Let's see what results we get. I'm going to share these with us. Let's have a look. Right, so some interesting points here. So are the current youth work training standards equipping trainee youth workers to be effective in the current context? 54% not sure. So I think that's going to give us a really good starting point of our discussions when we go into the breakout rooms of why aren't we sure about that? Do the national occupation standards need updating? 46% said yes, and 42% are unsure. So I think there's some definite room for conversation. Probably, are we the youth workers what young people need and wanting to? 69%, I'd love to have said that was 100%, but I think that's a great starting point of conversation. And are the youth work degrees setting students up to fail? Some interesting responses there, really diverse, and I think that's very reflective of the programmes altering across the UK, and maybe reflective of what we're seeing during COVID. So I'm going to stop sharing the polls now, and Hannah is going to draw us into breakout rooms to discuss these further. Could I ask, before I close, if somebody can take a screenshot of the poll to share within each of the breakout rooms? Hi guys, see you the other side.
Anna, can you see that request for help?
No.
Right, I'll deal with it, no problem.
Oh, it says the host is currently in the room.
Hi Rachel, you requested help?
Yeah, that's right. So none of us screenshotted the poll, so I wondered if you could help us.
Not sure if I've got a screenshot of the poll. Is it the questions that you want?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I can, Mike, I can post a link in the main chat here if anyone needs to catch up on it.
Oh, perfect.
Let me know if it works. Can we all see it?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Brilliant. I'll let you carry on with that, Dean.
Okay, thank you.
Mike,
Hey, Charlie.
what are we meant to be doing?
Have you not looked at the questions?
No.
Right.
I'm
Anyway.
not.
Is that the screenshot that we're supposed to take?
You should have received a link to a Jamboard.
No, none of us have. And we seem a very small group, which also makes me wonder.
Can you see them?
Yeah, we've got them now.
So there should be 4 or 5 per group.
Okay. And is there a Jamboard we're meant to be on?
You're group 7, aren't you? See, I didn't set this up, so I'm winging it as well. One.
So are the current youth, we've kind of discussed that one. Do the national occupation need updating? Good discussion. Okay. Are the youth workers that young people need want? Well, yeah.
Yeah, full stop.
Should we go and join another? I'm thinking to go join another group and become disruptive. What's this Jamboard look like?
Are youth worker degrees setting up students to fail?
And if you go to group 7s, I believe your group is. And if you want to, I think you can type your responses into it. I'll be honest, I've never used Jamboard.
So. Right, I'm sharing the screen just in case nobody else has. So group 1 have said
questions.
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to read everybody else's group.
Your group 7.
Yeah, but I can read everybody else's.
Yeah, but what we do is using Jamboard, all you do is you click on the arrow, go to your screen, and then everybody should be able to go to the left of the Jamboard and either pop in a post-it note, write something, freeze scribe. You can even download something from the internet, throw it in. Yeah. So on your particular page, just use your arrow to go to, whatchamacallit, Jamboard 7.
I've never ever heard of this Jamboard thing in my life.
It's amazing.
It's free with Google. So if you've got Google, if you've got a Google account, so Gmail account, it comes with that, as does Google Slides and all sorts of stuff. So it's really good for when working online with young people because then they can contribute, but it does use additional data. As in, you know, they have to have 2 things open at any one time.
Yeah.
So I was just reading everybody else's.
Is there anything else I can help with, Charlie?
No, thank you very much. I was just unsure what we'd kind of covered everything. So I was just thinking, what should we do?
No problem. If you need anything else, just give me a shout.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Hi everyone, welcome back.
I was definitely about to say something really significant then, guys.
Was she?
I'm only joking.
What was it? Oh, we had a wonderful chat in our group, and I'm hoping that everyone equally had really in-depth critical conversations as well. I'm mindful of how yesterday's conversations went, so I'd actually like us to park our questions and thoughts at the moment until we've had an opportunity to hear from our guest speakers today, because we do have a session at the end. However, please do, just as we did with Sue yesterday, when the time and the place is appropriate, interject those questions. I'm quite sure Paul and Abby would like those questions at the appropriate time. But in that case, I would like Paul or Abby, who is going first?
Well, that's a key question, isn't it? That would suggest that we'd planned this out between us before we got here. I'm happy to tag team if that works for you, Paul. Maybe we could do a double act together.
Hi, Abby. Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Abby. If you want to kick off, I've got some opening remarks and reflections, but I'm conscious I'd like to keep this as discursive and dialogical as possible.
Yeah, me too. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of your conference. I'm really, really pleased and grateful to be here. And what's brilliant is being able to see so many faces, people willing to keep their cameras on and engage in conversation. So that's really, really lovely. And for those of you that I haven't had the opportunity and the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Abby McClatchy and I'm Director of Youth Work at the National Youth Agency. So my responsibility is everything related to the skills and development for youth workers and the practice of good quality youth work with young people. So I'm kind of engaged and connected into lots and lots of different things that relate to us as youth workers or as development of structures, and also for the training of youth workers and youth support workers and also volunteers that might work in this space. I think the point that Paul made was a really important one. I haven't prepared a presentation, I haven't prepared loads of slides or anything like that, because what I really wanted the opportunity to do was to hear from you and engage with you and listen to what some of the things have been that you've been talking about and exploring during this conference, in particular in relation to the questions that you were considering today about professional skills and development and being well equipped youth workers to meet the needs of young people. So I think for me, one of the things for us to think about in relation to that is a bit of a context setting and a bit of thinking about what is the space that youth work is operating in right now, and what are the experiences that young people are getting and having from youth work and youth workers, and how we connect together to make sure that moving forward, we're giving young people the quality of experience that they have a right to and that they deserve. So for me, some of the key things for us to think about moving forward are, there are lots and lots of different studies that are looking at the impact of COVID-19 on young people, but also on youth work and youth work organisations. And some estimates suggest that 25% of youth work organisations that are in the charity sector will close this year as a result of the pandemic. And I think that's a really important consideration for us to think about. And also the experiences that students have had during this past year in relation to their practice and their skills and their development for young people. So I'd be really keen for us to engage with some conversations about that and how we need to shape things for the future in order to respond to that. There's something just come up in the chat from Jade. Yes, 25% they estimate, 25% of charities potentially working with young people will close this year. So yeah, over to you, I suppose, Paul, before we kind of move things forward.
Okay, thank you, Abby. I've got a few reflections just to perhaps stimulate some conversation as much as anything else. I know that you will have raised things in your groups. I don't know how that's going to translate into questions that we might share a little bit together. But if I just say a little bit more about my background, firstly, I'm representing the Professional Association of Lecturers in Youth and Community Work today. I'm conscious of some of the material labelling us as experts. I'm very nervous about that word. Generally, I think I'd much rather say that we're all experts in our own experience, but perhaps what I can offer is a perspective from my experience. It involves over sort of 30 years of youth work practice and 15 years in academia, working closely with colleagues across institutions in the UK and more widely. And as National Office Association, I actually work in a freelance capacity as an academic and a consultant, including I support 15 youth organisations around the UK through a strategic investment fund for the Paul Hamlin Foundation. So I'd like to think that I'm connected in different ways across the UK, both academically and professionally and practically, with different aspects of youth work, and can at least share my perspective from that experience. So I will pick up a little bit on some of the questions that we've already addressed and the little survey that was taken at the beginning of this afternoon's session, but I'd like to open with just 3 quick remarks, if I might. The first is to say, I think we should never forget how diverse our sector is, and that youth and community work is both complex, colourful and creative, as are young people. And we need to guard carefully, I think, sometimes about the way in which we can be guilty of oversimplifying or overgeneralising what happens in our sector, and even more so guard against homogenising what young people need at any one particular moment in time. Because just as it's ridiculous to say that all adults have the same needs, it's even more ridiculous to say that young people can be lumped into one homogenous group. Why is that important? Because it means there are very few easy answers, actually, I think, for the complex and diverse needs in our sectors. And sometimes we set up answers as being much more simple than they really are. People typically see things through their lens of their own experience and their culture and their context, and we need to be mindful of what we don't know and the limits of our own experience, and guard against sometimes the more narrow-mindedness that can creep in about what we would like to see at the expense of listening more broadly to what communities are saying. And that's important because I would want to twin in our conversations, well, this is the Institute of Youth Work, to say that I believe we're in the business of youth and community work. And I'm sold on that, and people are welcome to challenge it. Young people don't exist in isolation of their communities, however that's realised. And we need to guard against the atomisation of young people's lives and see our work in the context of those communities, seeking individual, social and structural change. Some things I know that were touched on in yesterday's session, and I picked up a tweet from Sue regarding that. It's good to hear that ongoing emphasis of the importance of youth work championing the social and structural issues for young people, not just their individual lives. And this requires us to work alongside other stakeholders in communities, physically and virtually, and to recognise their contribution is integral to the solutions that we all crave for. So there's some opening context to that, which echoes some of what Abby was saying about recognising the context, the currency of the situation that we face. But that's never been news. It's always been the work of what we do within our sector. A few quick reflections then on the actual questions that you've put forward today. I'll give you some answers that you can then bat around and perhaps engage with more widely. First question that people were asking early on was, is the current youth work standards fit for practice? Well, I'd say yes, if youth and community workers are supported to uphold the core values that underpin our approach to work with young people and communities, and if they are flexible enough to allow for adapting our practices and contexts in the areas within which we work. They're not fit for practice if they're rigid, prescriptive and fad-chasing. We need to be careful about that and guard against it. Do the actual national occupational standards need updating? Perhaps, and we should always be keeping them under review. But let's not forget they're only part of the learning we need as competent youth and community work professionals. I'd also draw your attention to the knowledge base that sits within youth and community work as well. Within your degree programs, they should all have been shaped by subject benchmarks. And these contain the knowledge and understanding that we would see as being a collective responsibility to share and embrace and engage with when you're engaged on a degree program leading to a professional qualification. And I'd actually encourage you as students just to look in on, see what those are. Or do your degree programs give you that understanding that you need, not just the skills. But the question I'm often challenged with is, how do we balance these two standards, both occupational skills, if you like, but also knowledge and understanding in such a way that it really does equip people to work in the current context? And we should all be continuing to wrestle with that. Third question that you addressed was, are you the youth workers that young people need? I mean, that's a really big ethereal question, isn't it? But my simple answer would be, yes, you can be. And we all can be, if we develop the critical reflective practice skills needed to engage meaningfully with young people and the communities beyond the formulaic approach to problem solving projects and requiring young people to conform to the status quo. We can move beyond that. We have the opportunity. And just today, I saw a marvelous example of this. I know we picked up the story in the press today, group of young people, youth-led activism, who stood up for the needs of a young woman in their school who wants to wear a hat. Did anyone else pick up on that story today? Isn't it good to see that somewhere these young people felt empowered enough to protest outside their school with baseball caps on, because the school had said a young woman who wanted to wear a baseball cap because of an illness that she's suffering, causing her to lose her hair, wanted that to preserve her dignity. I wonder how much we actually are the youth workers that equip that kind of attitude amongst young people. And finally, that kind of brings us to the final question that you're asking, which is, do degree programs in a sense set students up to fail? I don't think so. The data that we have actually shows that youth and community work programs provide employment for, if we're just looking at on an employment basis, for youth workers in multiple contexts. And actually youth workers go on to adapt and work in many different environments. Not so much on pay though, and that is a critical question and one we shouldn't avoid. Pay isn't great in the sector, and that's a problem for graduate outcomes, for degrees, but employment isn't. And actually good youth workers are in demand. I see that across the organisations that I support, and there are many opportunities growing in the sector for good youth workers. So there's my reflections. Happy to take questions and engage further in discussion with you all on those things.
Can I just come in to your point about youth work employment and youth work opportunities, Paul, because I think that this is really, really essential to the development of the infrastructure around services for young people moving forwards. One of the things that I think is a really key consideration for youth work training is about collaboration and collaborative practice. And I don't think that's just about how youth work should be perceived as assimilating into different environments, so youth workers within social work or youth workers within education. But I think one of the key things for us to address is how youth work is recognised as something that has significant equal value in the lives of young people and in communities and in organisations and in structures around young people. I think that's something that, if we're able to address that in a way, then we're able to begin to break down some of those structural barriers that might be in place for things like really good progression routes for youth workers that are paid the money that they deserve and valued in the way that they should be as important parts of structures and systems to walk alongside young people on their journeys. So I'd be really interested to hear about how people might be experiencing that, or how people might be part of shaping that in relation to their training too.
Yeah, I mean, the subject of pay is, I think, is an important one in the context, but it's also something that I think where we can we can work in allied ways across sectors to address issues around that, around low pay. I think whenever a single profession makes a stand about its own pay, it's problematic in not recognising the challenges that exist in allied professions in the same way. I think there's some solidarity to be found in challenging those at a number of levels, governmentally, where there's public pay involved, but also, as we know, through the broadly voluntary sector organisations that employ youth workers, and how we upskill and change attitudes towards pay and conditions and support, so that when people go into employment and bring their expertise and their passion, it's something that will be retained in the workforce and in those organisations and have the greater impact that we're looking for from working over longer periods of time, because short-termism is a tremendous problem in the sector.
There's an interesting question that's just come up in the chat that would be useful to explore from Esther, which is about how, if any, or what support there might be for employers that are operating within JNC, and how we might be part of supporting that moving forward. And from sort of a, as PSRB, professional statutory regulatory bodies perspective, it's a really difficult issue, because the JNC committee are, and representatives are a key part of the Education and Training Standards Committee. So they form part of the bodies that support the development and maintenance of qualifications and structures for youth work. But actually, in terms of structural support, from what you're talking about directly for employers, there's very little out there for them in relation to that. And I think part of the interesting debate that goes around that comes back to that conversation about the value of youth work as a profession. And I know lots of people here have had different conversations about, should youth workers be a registered profession or not, in the same way that social workers would, or teachers would be, and what might the relationship be between being a registered profession and support for employers for JNC. And people have lots and lots of different opinions on that. There's also some of the structural policy decisions that should influence that support for employers in relation to JNC. So some of you might be aware that I always say last year and forget that I've been pretty much locked in this room for a year. So I think actually, pandemic notwithstanding, before that, there was a national sufficiency debate. So youth work is enshrined in the law, it's legislated for, it's in the Education Act. It sets out clearly that local authorities have a statutory duty to provide youth work, in that phrase, youth work for young people. But the issue is that the language that's around that's quite soft. And so local authorities, talking about statutory local authority provision rather than voluntary sector, have not necessarily always protected that in their budgets. And, we see all of the information about this, £1.2 billion lost to youth work. And so one of the things that was happening pre-pandemic was there was a national review and a consultation about the statutory guidance for youth work in relation to who should be supporting the infrastructure for that. The pandemic kind of put a pause on that. But what we hear from policy colleagues is that review will be picked up this autumn. And so the long-winded response to the question about support for employers and protecting JNC and the value of the training that goes with the high-skilled practitioners that you become, I think potentially connects into what comes in that guidance and what comes in that sufficiency guidance. Because actually, if from policy onwards, everybody's saying this is important, this should be protected, we value these practitioners, we value what they bring to young people and communities, then it brings with it potentially that support for employers to hold dear those standards. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out there, I think. There's quite a few questions coming through. do you want us to just pick them up, or do you want to ask them specifically?
Yeah, could I signpost Tyler to probably actually talk through his response, because I think it's quite reflective of collectively as students as we felt, so it might be a good starting point.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry to throw you under the bus there, Tyler.
Can I just say something on behalf of Tyler? Yeah. Thank you. So, hi everyone. So, I done my youth work degree 7 years ago now, and I think I'm right in saying that whether you've done your youth work degree 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or 7 years ago, there's always we've always had that uncertainty. So, you know, Taylor, I really, really feel for students now, but again, that's my own perspective, because when I trained, I was part of a very strong youth work team with lots of opportunities. So would I want to train now with my life experience and where I am? I'd find that very difficult because of all of the opportunities I did have. But what I will tell you is you're doing probably the most amazing personal development course you will ever do. So regardless of where you're going to work, you're working on yourself every day when you pick up that book and you write your assignment. So please don't feel like there's no job opportunities there, because if as youth workers we're good at something, we are very resilient and we do adapt to change really well. I think for me in my career, I've got to a point where, you know, I don't want to keep adapting. I don't want to keep going into different teams. I want to be a core youth worker in a youth work team. And the more I sit here and think about what I'm going through at the council, Milton Keynes Council, is I don't have a team anymore. I'm not being youth worked by a management system. I'm sort of being left on my own, being told really that youth work doesn't matter, and I feel bad that I want to be a youth worker because that system's gone. But yeah, I just really wanted to say that for Tyler, because yeah, we can all say that it's an amazing course to do for personal development. Just want to add one quick thing as well. Again, sitting here thinking about the hierarchy and the teams thing and how that's sort of, you know, my struggle at the moment. A suggestion moving forward for our profession is to actually have a look at what a democratic model does in terms of democratic schools, where if you like the team, let's take the example of the teachers. They're not all qualified teachers, but they have, as long as you've got one qualified teacher within that team, you can move forward and you can create a strong model. And I think we could learn a lot from that. I've personally done 2 placements. I was very lucky to go to Sands School in Devon for twice for 2 weeks. And the comparison to youth work and education, I will tell you now, I pretty much cried on a daily basis. It was so strong. And I think we need to get back to having that that as a professional identity, but not for everyone to have a JNC, because I said in my breakout group, I was a support worker for 15 years before being qualified, and I've probably done some of my best youth work when I was unqualified, but I do see the value of a JNC, especially as a local authority worker, because of all the, you know, the pay and the standards and yeah, I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you, Adele. Let's just put another comment in. I think it's worth just bringing that in if that's okay. So just summarising what you've put, Tyler, is about the uncertainty of the sector as a graduate. So not really feeling confident that there are jobs to go to or progression routes. I think that's probably a fair summary of what Tyler's put. And I think
jump in there as well, Abby. I think I mean, two really different, but I think valid perspectives from different ends of the spectrum there as well, in terms of how we might look at this. I think what Tanai's saying is in the chat is really important. One of the things I think degree courses should be much more upfront about is the reality. There's a sense of overselling courses, but that's not unique to youth work. And I think that that's a problem in higher education. And it would be wrong to reduce the situation that the youth work faces to being just about youth work, because it isn't. Higher education has become a marketplace, and courses try and sell themselves and are often misleading students. And I don't think that's something we should be happy with, and it's something we should be challenging. And I think in courses, we need to be really honest about what coming into the sector means. And it is a diverse sector. It does involve different kinds of work. Some people will find employment with natural progression. Others will need to find that progression in their own pathway. That's not unusual in a lot of working professions and a lot of other working environments. So I think we should all be much more upfront about what the marketplace looks like, even if the marketplace isn't something that we would necessarily like to exist in its current form. There's the reality and there's what we hope for. And I think Adele raises a fantastic point about what we hope for. Those schools, and they're very few and far between, in fact, you can count them on one hand in this country, that run on democratic values, would be wonderful. And I get emotional when I see them as well, because they're beautiful to observe. But we don't live in that environment currently. We live in a very much conformist environment that young people have to fit into. And it's how we operate within this environment while aspiring for something much better. And we are collectively, we are all part of that struggle. And we need to continue to be part of that struggle and not lose sight of it, even though we might work within the system. And something I observed of my colleagues within academia is the tension that exists of wanting something so much better than what my colleagues have to live with on a day-by-day basis within institutions. But we need people both inside and outside those institutions to challenge and wrestle with the status quo and work towards change. It's not what we would all hope for. The planet isn't, but we need to be part of the struggle. It's not something other people will do for us. We need to form the collectivism across the sector to challenge these things, both with youth workers, but with those outside youth work as well, who share our values and principles.
Yeah, and I definitely echo that. Like way back in the chat, somebody had talked about us as a radical profession, and or a profession that should be radical. And I think it's really important that we hold on to that. We shouldn't lose that as the underpinning values and philosophies of what we're able to do. You know, we can be a part of creating different systems. We can be a part of creating different structures. You know, we know that for those of us that have worked in local authorities, sometimes those systems have been taken and choices have been taken away from us, but there are different ways and different ways of operating and different models that we can be a part of developing that shapes a new future that does bring in those different opportunities, that does bring in those different pathways for those of us working in different communities and with youth work, that might mean that the future is better and works better for those of us that are graduating from programs, but also that are co-created with young people. So back to your original question of, are we the youth workers that young people need now? Well, maybe there's some really good opportunities for us to create a new model and a new way of knowing and a new way of working that's collective, that brings all of your experiences as students now into being part of the design of that model for the future.
Esther's got her hand up. Can I introduce her?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so for those that don't know me, Esther Horner, Vice Chair of the Institute and Director for Kinetic Youth. I'm just popping up quickly. I just wanted to, I've been listening intently and I've been in and out because I'm in between prisons and projects and now hotels. I wonder if if we as a sector do enough to protect our profession. And by that I mean, I feel like we've spent a long time fighting against what we don't want to be, but perhaps it's not a bad thing to accept that the inevitability of change in today's environment, because, you know, communities change, young people change, needs change. So instead of perhaps saying, well, look, you can't be a youth worker because you're not JNC, maybe it's about saying, well, actually, that let's think a little bit more holistically about this. Let's bring everybody into this world, which I'm hoping that the IYW is making some strides forward in doing, and use that to protect our profession and really shout about it. And again, I'm going to raise this, and I raised it yesterday because I think it's really pertinent, is this idea around a lived experience being the only thing to qualify you. I feel is really, it raises a lot of uncertainty for me. I 100% agree that lived experience is essential in being able to build some relationships with young people. But there is this, you know, we do need this professional set of boundaries and structures to help formulate that service and protect these vulnerable young people.
If I can move over to Sue next. You're on mute, Sue.
I keep on unmuting and then it says you're muted. I think we're doing it box and coxing. There's a couple of things really. Abby mentioned progression earlier, and I just wondered how people experience that. I was thinking back to a time in my own kind of working life when people used to say to me, oh, we need women youth officers, Sue. You should be why don't you apply to be a youth officer? And my answer always was, because it's a different job. Youth work is this job. Managing youth workers, I would like more management in the style of youth work, but management is a different job. It's not the job that I want to do. And I think one of the interesting things is that a lot of universities have got workers there who in fact are youth working their students in a way. This is why I think when Adele said about it being personal development, it's a really interesting way to see there is in a way, a lot of the values of youth work are upheld in practice in universities. But the other thing is, I once was chair of JNC, and it was at the time when our pay and conditions was linked to the old teacher's salary, which is why it was always in relation to other local authority workers, for instance, quite generous, and we had 6 weeks holiday. And that was quite unknown in a sector where practically everybody else in the local authority had 2 weeks holiday, would you believe? But the move was starting to say, oh, we've got to build progression. And again, progression was seen as being more management, more finance, more admin. And at the time, the unions sort of stuck out their necks and said, no, we would like to see progression, which actually takes in a kind of much more sort of three-dimensional way of that. You can be an experienced practitioner, you can be a trainer, you can develop service, you can develop initiatives. Those are the skills that youth workers get in practice. At that stage, we came up with what became known as the grading matrix, which is still almost there, but I think you've lost some of it. But it was definitely part of the whole infrastructure that we built up, I suppose, 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s. I mean, I've just seen Bernard there. He was kind of beginning of the union. There was an infrastructure that we owned. And I think that one of the things that's happened with the whole kind of development of the neoliberal policies and politics is that infrastructure has gradually been dismantled. And I think one of the things that really we need to be looking at very carefully is how we not put together the same infrastructure, because you need it different. You need a different one maybe, but we do need to have ownership of that infrastructure that protects the practice that we all believe in. And I think the institute is a critical part of that. I also think in defence is a critical part of that. I think the colleges are a critical part of that. And it's like where that field is that we meet, as I said in the group, that wonderful sort of line out of a Rumi poem. Did I mention it yesterday? Probably did, because I do repeat myself a bit. It was the one about there is a place where there is no wrongdoing and no right doing. There is a field, I'll meet you there. And it feels like, to me, that's where we need to be meeting together and constructing our infrastructure that holds the thing that we're really trying to hold on to, that is, I think, gradually being eroded and controlled and moved over into very much a kind of a commodifying the whole process. I think we should resist it with everything we've got.
Anyone else?
Can I just add a word to that?
Yes, Bernard.
And this is probably too historical a perspective really to have much current reference, but I mean, the youth work field, in my experience, has always been divided on whether it wants to establish barriers which are labelled qualified or professional or whatever. Always struggled with that, putting those barriers up too rigidly, because of the sense that there were lots and lots of people out there who were youth workers, who call themselves youth workers, who needed to be called youth workers, who in the end were volunteers, and they may get some training and so on. Hopefully they would, but they weren't necessarily on this path. And some of the resistance to the kinds of things we're talking about now over the years has come from within the field itself. I'd be interested to see whether anybody else has any perspectives or any view on that, but that certainly is my reading of some of the history anyway.
Shall I just jump in? So I think, as ever, Bernard's grasp of history is probably much greater than most of ours. So thanks, Bernard. And I think you also real credit to actually having curated that for us. And for those students that aren't reading Bernard's work around the history of where we've come from, I would direct you to do so, because it provides us with a grounding of understanding how we've arrived at where we are today. So that's part of the knowledge base that I think is really important. And to pick up on Esther's point about lived experience and the balance between that and qualification, I think it is really important to reflect on that. And part of the history of that is that, of course, actually people couldn't train to be youth workers until they were in their mid-20s originally. And that was about valuing the importance of lived experience coming into that training perspective. Now, we have a very different situation now, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have 18-year-olds starting on youth work programs, and it's still a requirement to come onto youth work programs. I'm sure you're all aware that people fulfilled a certain number of hours of lived experience. But I think lived experience is really important, and I think there's also a danger that we push out lived experience by the way that we do training and higher education and push those people to the margins. So we need to rebalance those two things. I don't think it's an either or. We're all about these days pushing everything to binary positions and polarities, but it's not, it's both and. We need to find ways within which lived experience can enrich our understanding of what's happening in communities, while equally bringing the knowledge, understanding of history and learning to play to build on lived experience for real transformational change. So there is complexity to this, as I was saying earlier on, but we mustn't be afraid to wrestle with it. But I am an advocate of the importance of lived experience in the context of not lived experience alone. We don't park at that point, we move on. and that HE experience should support that. But as we know, HE is not representative often of those communities within which much youth and community work practice takes place. We mustn't be afraid to challenge that.
If I could just squeeze in there as well to kind of build on some of that. I was really interested by the points that Sue made about sort of how we kind of connect and co-create, because I think one of the really interesting things for me, certainly in my 20-something years in youth work, is equally as important as the learning that I did when I was doing my degree programs has been the learning that I've got to experience after that, from colleagues, from young people, from the different professional environments that I've been in. And so I think for me, I'm quite interested in how some of the spaces that we curate, so like in Defence, like the Institute, are a really, or should be a really integral part of that continuing support and development that we're able to ensure that we have across our journeys with young people and communities, because it doesn't finish the day that we leave university, does it? And I wonder whether everybody gets the same opportunity to continue their knowledge and their richness in their learning, and to learn from the history and the present, bringing in those lived experiences in order to enrich the work that we do. Just a thought really about how we make sure that those things are in place and those systems are in place so that we're better equipped, really.
That's great. Thanks for that response, Abby. Can I, Paris has had her hand up for quite a while. If I can just hand over to Paris.
Thank you. A bit apprehensive, to be honest, but I just thought there's something about, I was talking my own journey really, having done my degree in 2013, and I did start it when I was 18 years of age. But yeah, if it weren't for the love, which is usually what it is for youth workers, loving what we do, you almost ask yourself, I mean, I'm here, going to be 30, and ask myself, wow, is it always really worth the fight from a well-being standpoint? To be recognized in the field, to be able to progress in this space, as it were. And so, you know, by the time I left university, I had already registered my own organization, New Grounds Creation, just because my experience and from doing my 269 hours had opened up such great opportunities with a London college, wanted to take me on as a lecturer to do sort of a 12-week program for the 14 to 16-year-olds who are in an alternative provision. It was like, this is definitely where I'm going to be, and it's working. And so, but I had never, I've always been comfortable with closing my organization one day with this idea that I would have done all that I needed to do to sort of be recognized in the professional space and be offered a permanent job if I didn't make enough money through this. It was never about making the money through my own business. It was always just about the impact. And so I still, up till now, don't pay myself a dime, but I have a team of 8 facilitators that are working, youth coaching, running workshops, etc. But I've now handed in my resignation of something I was explaining to my breakout room as a project manager, where youth work was about 80%, well, 70% of what I was doing. And then the other 30% was talking to corporates and getting them to give young people opportunities. But I've now, just because I've decided that I've never been offered a permanent job. And, you know, I'm married and my family's growing, and it's just not, I need to build a pension. And so I've gone, and now I'm a director of Home Start. But if you're aware of Home Start, that's for children and families and mostly early years. It's not youth work. And I've always been able to say I've never veered from the youth work profession at all. Everything I've done has always been working with young people, whether it's in special educational needs. I came from youth violence background. I lost 4 of my friends when I was 16 years of age. So lived experience, both from a young person and just the stuff that I've done in the community is probably what made me eligible when I joined when I was 18. doing my degree, but I'm here because I'm probably thinking I did. This year I took the permanent gig. I'm clearly getting recognised in another space for my skills and expertise by being director of the charity. But really it's frustrating because I've applied to Paul Hamlin's Foundation, I've applied to all the big youth organisations, Catch-22, all of the organisations, and I don't even get into the interview. And so, you know, sometimes I just think, unless I know that that's because they've got tick boxes on their funding applications to have a more diversity team, that's usually the only other reasons why sometimes I think, am I in this space because I tick the black box, rather than am I in this space because of my experience and qualifications? And oftentimes I find that my JNC got me into interviews and the rest was just about preference or culture. Do I fit into the culture of the organisation? Not sure. And then my dyslexia became a barrier that I remember an employer saying, oh, you should have told us before applying, because it was your application that let you down. But I said, now you know that I'm dyslexic, what does that do? And oh, it's difficult. And so, yeah, I just wanted to sort of share my experience, because, yeah, I just think it's not, I know quite a few others being in the same boat, organisations even like the NCS. I applied twice. Imagine, and I helped 2 other young people apply for the NCS. They got the role, weren't youth workers. I was a JNC, didn't get the job. And it's just been those experiences, that has definitely made me resilient. But it has made me go, gosh, this profession, although I'm always championing for youth work to be present, it's not an easy ride. And you don't feel like there is this network. I mean, I only stumbled across this the last few months, the Institute, and I just thought, why is it not accessible? I used to want to be a lecturer to do youth work. Why are those opportunities not available for people why don't I see it in my network across the African and Caribbean workers who are there are many of us who work in this profession are not connected to member groups like this, or on calls like this, or in senior management positions. And so, yeah, that's all I wanted to contribute. Sorry for taking too long.
I'm actually going to just jump in there and speak on behalf of the students that came together. Paris, actually, I think that was probably the foundations of our question, that a lot of our placement opportunities have been, unfortunately, not in traditional settings. They've been in non-standard organisations. And as such, what we're then experiencing in our journey is that stability in finance, unless we are living in a neoliberal world, and unfortunately we have a bank manager that we need to satisfy for a mortgage, and we also have our own families. And we do come into the profession as a vocation, and I don't think anybody expects to be paid big bucks. But at the same time, we do want stability, and some of those opportunities, I think we were saying the national occupation standards failing us. No, but actually, are the places that we are gaining those experiences failing us? Are they the right organisations that embody the profession, that to keep us radical, to keep us true to our values, and also to network? I pick up on Paul's point earlier about the career progression. I'm very fortunate at Bolton University that one of our career advisors is a youth worker. So with that in mind, I knew how to navigate fields like LinkedIn and know that I didn't have to use the word youth worker to find those roles. But unfortunately, that's the problem. And I think that's why we feel that it's failing us, only in the sense of stability. Where do we go and practice? Where do we find these opportunities? We see local authorities that haven't had a youth service for a while. So how do we ground our experiences to manage? I'll put that out there. There's lots of discussion to be had.
Thanks both. I mean, I'll chip in there. I think there's some real complexities across what both of you said, and I really thank you for sharing your experiences. I think there's kind of a breadth. There's a real breadth to the issues that you raise, and I saw that Esther had put slightly further back in the chat as well, that there is something about inclusion and there's something about equality in what we're talking about. Now, whether that's, as you said, Paris, whether it's about, you know, some of the racial inequalities that are in our sector, you know, what are those opportunities for Black practitioners to have experience and gain roles in leadership, or whether it's about neurodiversity, or whether it's about, as Esther raised, you know, lived experience, level 3 versus level 6, you know, there is some real work for us to do, and that's not the royal we or us, it is all of us to do collectively to begin to address that, because I think it's quite fascinating that for a profession that's underpinned by anti-oppressive and anti-discriminatory practice, sometimes we're not very good at it in relation to these things and ourselves and our structures. You know, from a National Youth Agency perspective, we've just funded 2 really significant structural projects, one that relates to creating opportunities for development and career progression specifically for practitioners of colour, and also a bigger piece of work with an organisation called the Equalities Trust that are going to be doing a national kind of like a consultation and audit that looks at equality and diversity in the round, so touches on all of these things that we've talked about, to try and put a bit of a to create an opportunity for us to hear this and what's really happening, and then for us to co-create how we might want to create a new model for moving forward. So I'm not going to pretend that I've got answers for either of the things that you said, but equally, I think it's important to recognise that there is an acknowledgement that we have a problem, and there is an acknowledgement that there's an issue, and that there is an opportunity from that acknowledgement for us to begin to create something that that breaks down some of those barriers in order to make things feel more fair. I don't know if, Paul, you want to bring anything in relation to sort of HEIs and training for that?
Yeah, I mean, HEI is obviously going through a process of fairly critical reflection about that, and have been for some time, particularly around diversity, both in terms of ethnicity, but also importantly around class, and the importance of challenging the system within that. But I want to bring us back to this point about the importance of struggle. I think that there is an element to which I really value the fact that youth work is a struggle, and that helps to perhaps identify more with the context within which we're working than if it was comfortable. I don't mean by that that we shouldn't have well-being, that we shouldn't have systems, and we shouldn't have infrastructures, but there is a danger of us also becoming complacent. And one of the questions when I was looking at the questions for today that I'd kind of challenge us to think about is, if all of these systems and processes and progressions were in place for youth work, would we be happy with what youth work became as a result of it? Would we be happy to be regulated? If someone's going to regulate youth work, who's going to do it? Do we want to be run by the state? Is that what youth work's role is? Or do we operate more effectively from the margins, which is something that Janet Batsley, if you know Janet's work, has written more broadly about. So I do think there's things we need to be careful what we wish for sometimes. I don't want to be overly provocative, because I know that we also want to be able to pay the bank manager for our mortgage and all of those other things. But being part of the struggle is also, I think, part of the democratic process. And there's an importance to us being part of that, to identify within the communities within which we work. So I think there's a balance somewhere in there. But I really hear loudly what Paris and Toria have been saying around their experiences, and how we need to be listening, engaging, and changing things as a result of that.
Esther, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm happy to, I'm not sure how far we are from closing, so I can wait if you want to just invite me to talk in a minute.
Yeah, we've got 5 more minutes. Has anybody else got any points they would like to raise?
If I'll just very quickly say, and
Yes.
it's a bit of a plug of IYW, and maybe Esther might want to smack me in case I say something that she was about to say in her closing statements. But I just saw one of the comments in the chat box about discussions of power and privilege and intersectionality, and even in our own group talking about you know, the defining the youth worker role, and the things that I've heard that you guys, you know, have discussed in your planning meetings about your experiences as youth work students, and for quite a few of you about to graduate, so you're on that precipice, you know, and thinking about the role of the institute. And there are, this year we have been trying to do these kind of themed discussions, these monthly themed discussions, where we've looked at what's going on nationally, for example, like LGBT plus month, awareness month, or International Roma Day, things like that have been happening, and how can we then put on an event that's led by youth workers that identify with that, but it's open to both those people that identify with that group and allies, but the people from that group lead it, and they lead that conversation and try and create safe spaces. And we never, as the Institute, had any expectation of what should come from that. The idea was always that, like, we'll just hold the space and we can just have that space, and then if that's it, then that's fine, and we all go away, and that's it. But what we found is, with every single one of them so far, starting in February, people always want more. There's always a desire to have these safe spaces and be around other youth workers talking about specific topics, whether that be CSE awareness or mental health awareness, you know, whatever we've latched onto as a national or international event. And I just really feel like, and I know I'm fully aware of my bias, you know, being an employee of the Institute and a massive fan of it, but I do feel like there is definitely scope here for us to have more spaces like this where we come together, maybe even more so because of lockdown and restrictions and things. But I always feel so much more empowered and enthused and less isolated when I've been in spaces like this, and I know that my youth work methodologies and my passion for the sector is shared by so many other fantastic people, then I feel emboldened to go forth and do what I can. So I guess it's just to say to people here, you know, please reach out, please inform us. We were entirely led by a volunteer council of youth workers who often were working full-time and then volunteering on the Institute Council on top of that. Yeah, you have me now. I'm only on 16 hours a week, but you do have me, so I add some capacity, and I do really enjoy people communicating with me and guiding me and coming up with ideas about things that the Institute should be doing. And I definitely feel like we're going to carry on trying to create these spaces for people, and maybe some of those topics could be around intersectionality and power, and all of these really important topics, and you know, definitely around graduates and alumni and the support that you should have. You know, students are a core element of the membership of the Institute, so we need to make sure that we represent your experiences as well. So
thank you for that, Ruth. And I would like to echo that from the students that participated together on this, that we actually found this experience incredibly valuable, that in collaboration with the National Occupation Standards set out by the NYA, these discussions allowed us to navigate those non-traditional settings really well, that it was like having supervision on a collective scale. And that was really important, because we do understand that the shape of youth work is changing and maybe we do need to adapt slightly. But having these spaces where we were able to come and have a discussion and see power within ourselves to keep practicing the good fight as such was really valuable. And I'd probably echo, I mean, I don't know what influence you have, Paul, is that from a student point of view, it's taken to year 3 and a call out from the Institute of Youth Work for me to realise that that was a body I could be a part of. And I wonder from the lecturer's point of view whether this is something that needs to be advocated as a platform from day one for anybody entering training, of a safe space to take that autonomy to learn for ourselves. And I wonder whether that's something that collectively we can empower people to make that choice for themselves, but understanding that signpost is vital.
Thanks, Lorna. Yeah, I think it's something we can all do more to promote, and it's been an ongoing sort of ambition of mine that we can do more to connect students across institutions, just full stop, for collaboration and collective learning. And because when people exist within one environment, it often limits the knowledge and understanding of what's happening elsewhere, and we're all enriched and we have better understandings, stories that have been shared today that create powerful opportunities for us to look at things differently. And I think that that would be great. And if this is a launch pad for that going forwards, as was said at the beginning of the day, you know, the ideas for bringing students together for a conference came through discussion between the Institute and the association some years ago, and through students attending some of our more academic conferences as well. And I think it would be really good if we could build on this so that there is much more shared learning and a sense of community that can take forwards what the profession will look like in the future. And there isn't any reason why that can't happen more effectively when students start on courses at university.
Can I just add to that too, that you know, that it's important that students also have a voice and connecting to the Education and Training Standards Committee. So the Education and Training Standards Committee are the network of people that come together to validate degree qualifying programs in youth and community work. There are students represented on that body, but just because there's already students doesn't mean that there isn't room for more, and also for spaces and voices to be heard. So I would encourage you also to think about, you know, so your ask about, for example, connecting into shaping and conversations moving forward and sharing places like the Institute, is there a way to feed in directly to the Education and Training Standards Committee so that that then can roll out across the whole network of providers? And I'd be more than happy to kind of connect you into, and Kevin, who's the development officer that services that, in order to kind of like create a two-pronged approach with PALIQ for the lecturers and the Training Standards Committee to roll it across the board. I think it would be really, really valuable. And it's really important because it will shape the direction of programmes moving forward. So they're really well informed and really contemporary.
Thank you for that, Abby. And as Tyler's put in the chat box, that connects us really well onto tomorrow and how we move things forward, and not only what young people want from youth work, but what we want from that. So I think that discussion is going to be equally as valuable. Time is running short, and I know that we're all on the clock a little bit. So I'm going to pass over to Esther to close. But from ourselves, thank you guys for your time and your contributions. It's been incredibly valuable.
Thank you. Now I will keep this brief because I'm not sure how much more battery my phone's got left on it. Okay, so thank you to Paul for your time and contribution today. Thank you to Abby. A huge thank you to the student committee that has made it all possible, and a massive thank you to Ruth for being, as always, the glue that keeps us all together. I did miss the first hour, as I said, but you know, I understand what we've been talking about. Is the training that we're providing our students equipping the students enough to go out in the field and practice? This is a theme actually that's come out in the peer networks that we've been running. It came out in an LGBT peer network event that we ran recently, and it's really got sector through these peer networks to actually feed directly back into that, you know, the ETS and PalaQ, the HEIs. You know, we need to really kind of make sure that we're pulling all this together and we're not missing something. And to go back to what was said yesterday, you know, if we spend all our time looking for coal, are we going to miss the diamonds? Thank you, Sue. I'm going to keep quoting you on that. I can talk on behalf of IYW, and I'm going to do that and keep it brief, because I think you get 15 minutes of me tomorrow, so you're going to get bored enough. IYW is going to be here for everybody who works with young people, and whether or not you're a qualified youth worker, pre-professionally qualified youth worker, or a volunteer out in the field with no qualifications. We want to bring all practitioners together so that we've all got a safe space to support. We want to provide a place where, you know, we can provide reflection for everybody who's out there in the field. We want to provide a space for supervision. We want to provide this peer networking events and that kind of support that I've told you about. And we want to be the organisation that can bring the sector together. We're doing this as a bunch of, you know, really highly dedicated volunteers, and you know, we are only as strong as our membership base. So if you are not a member of the IYW yet, or you are a member but you know a lot of your friends and colleagues who aren't, please come and join us. Right now we're doing a free membership drive. Come and join us, because the bigger we are, the stronger we are, and the more difference that we can make for ourselves and for our sector. I do think we have a massive responsibility here to provide equity in the sector, and that's going on from a lot of what's been said today. And Paris, thank you so much for your contributions earlier, and I really would love to connect on an individual basis with you, and also, you know, please come and connect with the Institute. You know, you've got so much to give, and we'd love to bring your skills and experience into that to help us be a richer, more reflective, representative body of youth practitioners. So please do take that up. And I do think there's something in it for, you know, people like myself, you know, who can hold a position that has, you know, significant power and influence. Is it always meant to be my feet that are stood in that position? Should I be standing aside? Should we be providing that equity, that parity, you know, opportunity? So we're here together. We aren't a sector that needs to infight. We're a sector that needs to give each other a massive support network and hug. I am aware that everybody's coming to the end of this the end of day 2, and day 3 is coming up. Day 3 talks about the future.
Oh no, what a place to lose Esther. She couldn't possibly tell us about the future. You have to wait until tomorrow.
Frozen in the present.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful place to go. I really do. dot, you know.
Yeah. You'll have to come back tomorrow, guys.
Bernard, do you want to just interject?
What's that?
Yeah.
Bernard was waving. I don't know if he wanted to speak or whether he was saying goodbye.
He's just waving goodbye.
Right.
Bye, Bernard. Well, I mean, it is 3 minutes past 3. So, Lorna, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yep. So, guys, thank you once again. It's been really enriching, and thank you for giving us a platform and listening to our side of the discussion, because I think listening to all angles of every debate is really important and gives balance to every conversation. And I hope that leads us greatly into tomorrow and how we take things forward. And please keep talking. Let's share these ideas, because collectively we can conquer anything. So I will see you all tomorrow in the afternoon. Enjoy your evenings. Goodbye.